Welcome, everybody. Man, I can't see any of you. My name is Jacob Schumann. Welcome to our first ever TEDx Bellarmine. Before we get started, I'm going to cover a few housekeeping things. First of all, we will have 2 10-minute intermissions. There will be an hour between each. Otherwise, please remain in your seats. If you do need to leave, however, there are 2 exits. There's an exit there that you came in, which is our primary exit for emergencies, and there's also an exit to your left. And see the man behind the curtain. Make sure you cut off all cell phones. There will be no photography during the entire thing. We have professionals doing that. No flash or anything like that. We don't want your phones getting up and getting in the way of anybody else's experience here. And we want no speaking as well. Clap if you need to. We want speakers to feel welcome. Without further ado, I will bring over our Master of Ceremonies for the evening, Quincy. Get on up here, Quincy.
Hello. Once again, my name is Quincy Nelson, and that was my awesome co-host, Jacob Schumann. So our theme for tonight's TEDx is who we are, past, present, and future. I just want to say thank you so much for coming and attending today. This is a big event. We prepared so long for it, and it's finally here. Thank you again so much. So now, let's explore our first section of the past. Our first speaker is a professor here at Bellarmine University. Please give it up for Professor Eric, whose Dutch surname you pronounce with 1 O. Dr. Royda.
Thank you, Quincy, and thank you to the TEDx crew for inviting me. Especially want to thank my old friend Crystal for extending the first wave to become part of this event this evening. So I'm Professor Eric, and I'm going to tell you about the peace-loving soul of Bellarmine University, and that involves Father John Loftus and his friends. And those would be Brother Thomas Merton, the Reverend Martin Luther King Jr., and also Jerry Garcia. So going back to 1950, the height of what's called both the Cold War and the Red Scare, soon after the Soviet Union exploded its first atomic bomb, even sooner after Mao Zedong had declared the existence of the People's Republic of China and taken 800 million more people into the red zone, as it were, of the Cold War. And then Congressman Richard Nixon had exposed a Soviet spy within the State Department named Alger Hiss. Isn't that a great name for a spy? And very famously, Joseph McCarthy, senator from Wisconsin, gave a speech in Wheeling, West Virginia, where he claimed to have a list of 126 known communists at the State Department. And so the Red Scare was off, and then it turned very hot with the outbreak of the Korean War. So at this time in history, that's when the Archdiocese of Louisville, Kentucky decided it would be a good time to start a new college for young men. Now, during the Cold War, Red Scare, the Red War, Cold Scare, it's kind of all part of the same thing. And it's a time when the faith of nationalism triumphed over the reason of compassion and cooperation and nonviolence. And so I think it was in that spirit that the founders of the university chose a notorious anti-intellectual to name the place after, St. Robert Bellarmine, a Jesuit cardinal and a father of the church. Now, mind you, the founders of Bellarmine College were well aware of the reputation of Cardinal Bellarmine. He had been the head of the Roman Inquisition, and in that capacity, he had condemned to horrible torture and death the free-thinking and outspoken Giordano Bruno, whose statue stands in a plaza in Rome today, and most famously or infamously, He told the brilliant mathematician, the improver of the telescope, to be quiet. Galileo Galilei had proven heliocentric theory that Copernicus had had the good sense not to publish until after he died. And that, of course, contradicted the Bible. And so Galilei had to stop spreading those crazy ideas, said Cardinal Bellarmine. And then, after Bellarmine's death, when Galileo, who had not been able to restrain himself, was brought back for a second trial, it was Bellarmine's words that were used to condemn Galileo to house arrest for the rest of his life. So they sent him and his telescope back to Florence, and Galileo lived in his little Tuscan village for the next 18 years, never left his house, and he died there. And so it was that 7 years before the groundbreaking on the first building here at Bellarmine College, Bertolt Brecht, the avant-garde German playwright, had cast Cardinal Bellarmino as the villain in his masterful play, Galileo, Life of Galileo. And there's Cardinal Bellarmine on the left wearing a sheep's mask, as he does throughout the performance. And so it would seem that the powers that were in the Archdiocese had intended Bellarmine College to be a bastion of conservatism, given that name, right? But instead, the first dean of the college, John T. Loftus, a Franciscan, deflected the trajectory, the trajectory of the soul, really, of this place through his shaping of it in the first years of its existence, all the way until 1969, when he died. This is a beautiful drawing of him done posthumously by Charles Campbell, graduate of the class of 1971. So it was the Franciscan Loftus who planted the seeds of Franciscan compassion and peace and understanding here at this hilltop campus, and gave it that unique aspect to begin with. A lot of this art is my own. If it's not signed, it's mine. So it was President Alfred Horrigan who hired Dean Loftus and who supported him in his efforts to shape the college, and that began with diversity. It was Dean Loftus who brought in the first African-American faculty member, Dr. Henry Wilson, an eminent chemist who became not just the first tenured professor, but the first full professor at Bellarmine University, and taught until 1969. He is among the notable Kentucky African-Americans. And then Father Loftus decided that in 1959, the next instructor had to be a woman. And he recruited a PhD recently minted from the University of Minnesota, originally from Montana, a very maverick sort of individual, Margaret H. Mahoney. They had to actually build a bathroom for her because the monks hadn't thought about a women's restroom when they designed their college for young men. And Father Loftus chose well, because Dr. Mahoney taught here for the next 53 years, if you can wrap your head around that. And her existence here was a long step toward Father Loftus steering Bellarmine College toward a merger with the much more venerable women's college from the other side of town, Ursuline College, founded in 1923. And so that merger occurred in 1968. During that 1 year, that we had the rather ungainly name of Bellarmine Ursuline College, but then just reduced it back to Bellarmine College. In the meantime, Father Loftus had decided that there needed to be a civil rights march on Kentucky's capital. And he pulled some strings and invited some people that he knew. And so he got to the party Martin Luther King Jr. and Jackie Robinson Jr. and the Queen of Gospel, Mahalia Jackson, and the incendiary shock jock, shock comedian Dick Gregory, as well as the folks singing trio Peter, Paul, and Mary, whose big hit song, Blowin' in the Wind, was on the radio waves at that time. And he brought Bellarmine with him as well to the March on Frankfurt with President Horrigan's support. He gave absences, excused the absences of any student who wanted to go, and he told the faculty they could cancel their classes for the same reason, and he provided transportation. 7 school buses filled with Bellarmine students and like-minded young women from Ursuline descended on Frankfurt to take part in the march that day. And then the next year, then Father John was reunited with his friend Merton at the much more famous Selma, Alabama march. During the mid-1960s, Bellarmine became a haven for young men who were opposed to the Vietnam War and were afraid of being thrown into combat. And they knew that they could come here and get the status of conscientious objectors. And if they were drafted, they would not have to serve in combat roles, but in medical roles or other nonviolent roles. And they knew that the peace-loving faculty, led by Father John, would facilitate their gaining that status and being able to follow in the footsteps of Muhammad Ali and not be involved in the Vietnam War. By 1968, Father John had so changed the temper of the times here that Bellarmine was sort of in the groove of the counterculture. And the Grateful Dead played here. It's a rather famous show among dedicated Deadheads because it's the only live show where they played Rosemary off Oxy Moxy, which they put on their Greatest Hits album. How weird is that? They only performed a Greatest Hit once? But most important, Father John was a deep soulmate friend of the great Father Lewis, Brother Lewis, Thomas Merton, the silent Cistercian monk of Gethsemane Abbey. Their voluminous correspondence attests to their close bond. Now, in 1968 is when Brother Lewis decided to leave the Abbey and go to visit Thailand, and he died suddenly there on the 10th of December. And it was on the 11th of December then, one day after the death of Merton and 3 days after the Dead show, that Dean Loftus wrote a poem and released it to the student body, and it goes in just a brief excerpt. It's called Beyond the Seven-Story Mountain. It begins, Thomas Merton is dead. Let the world maintain his celebration. Merton loved God and men and trees and food and drink and song and laughter, thick tomes and bongo drums. Aquinas and Ginsberg and Joan Baez and Pope John. Fill the emptiness with light and sound, cheerful, triumphant noise, for Merton now knows God, he wrote. Now, the most important moment in the formation of Bellarmine's peace-loving soul had already occurred, and that was when Thomas Merton had decided to bequeath his extensive personal archive of papers to his friend John's Bellarmine College. And it's the existence of those precious documents here that makes the place enduringly unique. People come from all over the world to take advantage of the archive. It was less than a month later, on the 7th of January, 1969, when John Loftus himself went to know God with his friend Thomas. And a student at the time, Evelyn Wilson, wrote a poem, or a poem-like essay that concluded this way: Is Father John really dead? He would rather we answer with our lives. Is his life part of us? And are we alive? So thank you, Father John Loftus, OFM. You live on here at Bellarmine University. Thank you very much for your attention. Thanks kindly. You're supposed to wait for Quincy. Here's Quincy now. Thanks, my brother. Appreciate it.
So much knowledge from one man. He's a great guy. Okay, so thank you, Dr. Reuter. Our next speaker is John Stimmer. Give it up for John Stimmer.
When most people think about archives, they think of drab, dusty, unexciting places, like this. Or maybe they think of forbidding places that collect the glories of the past, like the National Archives. I think this is misguided. Archives are filled with materials that have a story to tell, or could help you tell a story. They are an adventure waiting to begin. They are not a past looking to be put away. Archives collect the records of their communities, and they always will. But today, they face a new challenge, what you might call the digital dark age. Previously, records used to be maintained for a while, and then they would be reviewed and collected at a later date. Now, they are discarded quite quickly, as easily as you might delete a picture off of your cell phone. So, what does the future hold for the collection of the past? Any effort to examine our past to look at the path that we have taken over time is going to rely on archives. Bellarmine is a young institution, and our archives will help us tell our history. They also already link us to the wider Catholic and Louisville communities. And I have a few examples of this. So our archives are filled with institutional records. Really exciting stuff, let me tell you. But they will help us tell our story, and they will also help you tell a story if you think about it. So for instance, why would anybody be interested in the Bellarmine Medal Award ceremony for 1975, except somebody at Bellarmine? Well, if you would like to support the case for the canonization of Archbishop Fulton Sheen, the recipient that year, you might use our institutional record to raise awareness of the bishop and link us to the wider Catholic community. But it is not only institutional records that we have. Dr. Allen Lansing is a longtime supporter of the university. He is a namesake of the Lansing School here at Bellarmine. He is a world-famous heart surgeon, and his pioneering surgeries made news around the world. His papers are in the Bellarmine archives. That collection and other collections link us to the healthcare community and the wider Louisville community. A different glimpse for what archives could be in the future can be seen in the fireplace room in Treese Hall. There is a photo of St. Teresa of Calcutta, Mother Teresa. And next to the photo is a QR code. Now this display was put in place to commemorate the 1982 visit of this future saint to Bellarmine's campus. That QR code links directly to archival materials, including a video recording of the press conference that took place in that room. Who knows, maybe someday it could be a virtual reality experience of the press conference. But this is not history put away. This is history brought out into the present, made available and interactive, so that we can experience the adventure that those people had. When you're dealing with the archives, you never know where you're going to find the adventure. I think of the Benjamin Robertson film collection. These films were found in university storage. They were tucked away in a dusty cabinet, kind of in the attic, so to speak. Nobody knew what they were. So we examined them and looked and discovered that they were home movies from the 1930s. Several of them were from a round-the-world trip that Robertson took in the 1930s. One of them was a video from the Abbey of Gethsemane. It is perhaps the oldest video of the monastery and its monks. We were able to preserve this film through a grant from the National Film Preservation Foundation. After we did that, we provided a copy to the archivist at the monastery. He was thrilled, he was stunned. Here was a record of the timeless nature of monastic life, and he shared it right away with the monastic community. I think that the Robertson collection hints at a different role for archives of the future. These are not official records, but they do provide important documentation of the life of our wider community. And I think that the non-institutional nature is what is important here. Future archives do not have to be restrictive scholarly spaces all about institutional records and famous individuals. They could be open, accessible, and participatory experiences. They could be records of our common lived experience. They could be collections that tell our story and our adventures. The library and the School of Communications have been working on a project, the Bellarmine Media Archive, that will hopefully bring this into reality. The Bellarmine Media Archive would, of course, collect institutional materials, but it would also collect materials from individuals who have documents that highlight the role of the university in the wider community. So perhaps you know somebody that has similar materials. Perhaps you have materials that document our shared life together. Consider what might be in your attic that could be of community value. Archives do not make the past come alive. Archives are where you make the past come alive. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Makes me want to keep my receipts. Our next speaker is Dr. Hon Choi. Give it up for Dr. Hon Choi.
When I was in college, I took a course on Afrocism. It's a course that dealt with religious beliefs, rituals, and practices of indigenous groups in sub-Saharan Africa. After taking this class, I felt educated, cultured, felt pretty good about it, right? Upon some honest reflection, however, I felt that the course was inadequate. It didn't give me the cultural competency that it promised. It was informative, and I thought it was a good class, nevertheless inadequate. Why? Well, that didn't make sense to me until I thought about my own experience as an Asian American person living in this country, and evaluating that experience, or evaluating taking that course through the lens of my experience, which gave me clear vision of what that course really was about. So what am I talking about? Well, as an Asian American person, I often became a token Asian. I was always invited to be in a picture. You know what I'm saying? You know what I'm talking about? You know. So what it does is that it gives the appearance of diversity. Whether or not it actually has diversity, if the group or institution or the culture actually has that diversity, doesn't matter. It gives you the appearance of diversity. So basically, it serves as an optic or optics. It gives you the illusion that there's diversity. And over again, I'm asked to be part of this picture. Let me give you an example. I was asked to be a cover model for the admissions catalog at my undergraduate school. Now, and this happens over and over again in my life. Unless I am drop-dead gorgeous, and I'm open to that possibility. But my wife right now is shaking her head, so I'm thinking that that's probably not why, right? I was asked to be the cover model because at the time, the institution was not very diverse. And the rhetoric was, well, it serves a function. It allows the school to represent or present itself as diverse so that people who look like me may be enticed or want to come to this school. Well, I don't think that's effective. First of all, it's a lie. Secondly, that after 20 years since that time, that school has increased the demographic that I represent to about a little bit over 1%. It's not very effective. It's a lip service. Incidentally, that picture appeared again 8 years after I graduated in the bookstore webpage. So they either really like me and they really think I'm gorgeous with our receding hairline and skinny little body that I have, or that they're using this for optics. Oh, full set of hair. Those are the days. Those are the days. I think the diversity requirement, the one course diversity requirement, serves a similar function. It's a lip service. It is a form of tokenism. Also, if you have this kind of checkbox system where you check off a requirement, it gives the sense that this is something that you check off. Get it out of the way. And implying, get that issue out of the way. Get these kind of people's concern out of the way. It has that connotation. And having it as an elective, rather than part of the requirement for history, English, math, whatever, then it gives you the notion that somehow my issues of my people will never be the center. It will always be the elective. It will always be marginalized. We will always be minor. Not just in number, but we are minoritized. We are made to feel smaller, minor, less important. Never just American, but hyphenated American. Gotta describe myself. Never be accepted as the norm. My body will forever seen as perpetually foreigner. I think we can do better. I think there's a way that we can do this more comprehensively and holistically. How do we do this? First, students in the foyer, listen. First, I think we should get rid of it. Get rid of it. It's not effective, and to a degree, to me, it's offensive. To have one requirement that somehow makes you culturally competent, get rid of it. However, I think that we should encourage diversity. Get rid of it for the students, but require it for the teachers. Review your syllabus. Bring diversity in all aspects of the curriculum. Not just one course, but every discipline. Now, when I say this, I know teachers, I know there's going to be a pushback. And when there's a pushback, I want to have an answer. Here's my answer. Also, when I say this, science and math and STEM people will say, well, that's easy for you to say, theologian. You're in humanities. It's easier to do. I would say, okay, well, even if it's easy, humanities professors don't do this either. So let me present to you what I think is part of the solution. Well, if you're requiring history and that history course does not cover the fact that Chinese Americans in this country built the foundation and the infrastructure for this country, like the Transcontinental Railroad, or that the history course does not cover the fact that there was a Japanese internment camp because of the Executive Order 9066 by FDR, if the history class does not cover that, I think it's inadequate. And I think you can include those in the history requirement. As we know, the literary canon is pretty white. I'm just going to say it. Or, at best, black and white. And I would say, well, include some of these stories as part of the requirement, not as a side note, but as part of the English requirement. The one that deals with the complexity of the effects of a war, or the complexity and intersectionality of how people with this body experience their lives in this world. Or include literature that makes Latin American bodies feasible also. You're teaching art. Include African American artists who deal with social issues. It forces students and teachers to deal with the social justice issues in this country. Include Asian bodies, which makes the conversation about social justice more global. If you're talking about geography, what if we taught geography with no boundaries? Because in fact, boundaries don't exist in reality. What if we did that? Or if we have to teach boundaries, how about we teach about how those boundaries happen through colonization? That those boundaries and limitations exist as a result of colonization, and the effects of that colonization is very much alive today. Perhaps in our education system, we need to decolonize our educational system. Full disclosure, I'm a post-colonial theologian. You guessed it. For those classes who are content-driven, who says, well, we don't have room for diversity. It's impractical. It's unrealistic. The same kind of rhetoric that I hear everywhere. Impractical, unrealistic. Whenever you hear that, I think a suspicious light should go on. Well, there's a teacher here at Bellarmine. Should I embarrass her, Dr. Challoner? That covers all those contents, yet also require her students to attend lectures that deal with diversity issues in science. Women of science, or better yet, women of color in STEM. It's beautiful because that way, not only are the students required to deal with diversity issues in STEM fields, but also it requires the school to hold lectures, enough lectures on diversity so that students can attend. If you're talking about business, what if you taught business from a different perspective, from female perspective? Here's a friend of mine from college, Genevieve. I'm going to embarrass her. She started a company called City. She realized that CEOs of these big companies do not see this issue as important. As a female person with female experience, she says, how are they missing this? So she started a company, babysitting company, and she became multimillionaire and sold it. And now she does what she wants to do with her life, which is being an opera singer. I should have really befriended her in college a little bit more. I think this is important because it has to do with my experience, and that's how I see education system in America, especially in the institution of higher education. Let me have a little bit of a digression because it's all related. According to Brian Metzinger, Father Metzinger, racism is a culture, it's a system which has meanings and value which is expressed in symbolic forms. But that symbol that he's talking about is talking about the soul of a culture, not external symbols. Let me explain. External symbols means things like the music that you listen to, the clothes that you wear, the food that you eat. We're not talking about external symbols. External symbols become lip services to diversity. You can say, well, I like Chinese food, so I must be woke. I can't be a racist because I like sushi, right? These external symbols are not how we get to the core of the problem of diversity. Just because you do yoga does not make you open-minded, progressive, and enlightened. Nothing against yoga. I'm not, speaking against yoga. But I think that one diversity course that's required as a diversity competency requirement serves the same function. And that taking that one course, this is the thing that I'm afraid of. Taking that one course gives the illusion for the students that good intention, I get it, but that good intention can contribute to these kind of external symbols. By taking this course, students might say, well, I took a course on Africism. Now I know Africa. As if it's like a country or something, right? So what do? Well, it's a daunting task to do an overhaul of this, and again, impractical and unrealistic, people will say. Well, there's actually a group in this school right now, LET, a task force that is looking at a comprehensive way of dealing with diversity for every single discipline. Even with the pushback, they're looking into that. But I think where we start initially, I think we should start with individual professors and their introspection. They need to do an introspection. And as an institution, we need to do an institutional introspection. How am I doing? Well, one way to examine how you're doing is not to look at the subject matters that you cover. Well, you know, I cover diverse topics, because if you just do that, then you can encourage mansplaining, whitesplaining. Do you get this? Right? So rather than doing that, if you want to look at the systematic problem of racism and deal with that, the best way to do this anywhere is follow the trail. Follow the trail of money. Are they putting money where their mouth is? Individually, what we can examine then is not to look at the topics that you cover, but the authors that you use. Authors of your textbooks. In fact, this was from a friend of mine, a colleague, Dr. Christine Hong from Columbia Theological Seminary, who gave me this idea. When she suggested this, I looked at my syllabus and looked at my authors and realized my textbooks were all written by white authors. Me. So it was a moment of epiphany. If that can happen to me, I think it's an important epiphany for people who are in the dominant group. I think it's an exercise that tells you where we are, and we can do an honest reflection about where we are and what we can do. So why is a theologian such as myself concerned with this? Because I believe celebrating the fullness of humanity gets us closer to God and to one another. And we can't do that unless we celebrate it in the fullness and in a rigorous form and in a comprehensive form. After all, we're at Bellarmine, where the spirit of Thomas Merton lives. And Thomas Merton said that we are already one, but we imagine we're not. How do we imagine that we're not? Because we are only concentrating on Eurocentric textbooks, Eurocentric authors, and Anglo authors and topics. But we are already one. How are we one? Well, because God created us that way. There is unity in diversity. If we celebrate diversity and find commonality in that diversity, we celebrate the fullness of humanity, which gets us closer to God. So what we have to do is to recover who we are. And our education system should reflect that. Because we are already one. All of us are already one. What we have to do is simply be who we are. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Choi. That was very good. I loved it. Okay. Our next speaker is a senior here at Bellarmine University. Please give a warm welcome to Kayla Martin.
Most of the religions that you've heard of today have a global reach. The religions most commonly referred to as the Big Five are Hinduism, Buddhism, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. And while there was once a time where these Big Five religions were only located in one geographical part of the world, our world has expanded to the point where it is almost impossible to live somewhere, work somewhere, or study somewhere where there isn't someone who worships differently from you. Now, there is sometimes a problem. People don't really know how to go about this diversity. They're scared that they'll say the wrong thing or something like that. So I decided to come here and talk about the theology of difference with you guys today and how we can have better interfaith dialogue. The inspiration for my talk comes from a very beloved figure here on Bellarmine's campus, and that is Thomas Merton. He has written a lot of things, but one of my favorite works by him is Conjectures of a Guilty Bystander. In this book, Thomas Merton discusses this idea of the law of love. Now, this law is not to just be found in genuine in gestures of niceness or anything like that, but it's to be seen in genuine interaction with one another, seeing each other as a brother or sister united in a common humanity, sitting down with people that are different from us, who may even be seen as our adversaries sometimes. A big part of this law of love comes from Pope John the 23rd that you see right there. He came up with this, well, he didn't come up with Socratic dialogue, but it was a big part of his whole thing with Vatican II. Now, I believe there are three paths, well, two paths that are most commonly done when it comes to interfaith dialogue. The similarities, the differences, and the third part that I'm going to strongly advocate for you all here today, the theology of difference. So let's jump into it. The path of similarities is something I see very often as a student of theology and world religion. Usually, you can tell it's a path of similarity when they say, we all go to the same place in the end, or it's all the same religion, there's just different names. While I do believe people do not have bad intentions when they say this, this is one of the most damaging and ineffective things that we can do to a community. They believe this because they think it avoids conflict, and they think it brings a false peace. Because, oh, you know what? If we all agree on the same thing, we can't argue, right? And this does bring a false peace, I argue, because it's only touching the surface, not seeing what's underneath. And this can really hurt many people in a community. They have a negative view of difference, which I believe should not, always be the case. And they have two big problems. They see sameness as equaling value, and the idea that, okay, the only reason you can sit at my table is because you're similar to me. That's the only way I'm going to be able to really interact with you. Now, I don't believe people do this at all. Like I said, not a bad intention. But this is what's happening subconsciously sometimes. And they have the wrong definition of unity, seeing it as an underlying sameness. Now, path 2 is about the differences. This is kind of a path that's a little bit more antagonistic. It ultimately sees people as other. And something I commonly hear when people talk about this is, you know what? They can't even get along within themselves in their own denominations. How can I get along with them with a religion that's coming from left field? This is fueled by misinformation, sometimes inspired by conversion, and ultimately fear-driven. Merton had some very pivotal words on this. He once wrote that if he denies all that is Muslim, Buddhist, Jewish, and so forth, then there is nothing for him to confirm himself as a Catholic, and certainly no breath of the Spirit to do so. That's what's really going on here. If we can only define ourselves by what we are not, we're not defining our true selves. If I said, I'm Kayla because I'm not this, this, and this, I'm not defining myself. When I say I am Kayla because I am this, this, and this, that's where we really get going on common ground. Now, path 3, the path that I am strongly advocating for you all here today, is the theology of difference. This is the only path I believe that fully embraces the law of love, and that you're coming to the table with someone who is different from you, but you see them as a brother or a sister, united in a common humanity. This is very important. It has the correct definition of unity, because this unity has an underlying concept of diversity in it, this difference. It looks at our similarities, but it also embraces the difference as both being something that's so equally important. It has a full and total Socratic dialogue where we sit down not with the intention to fight or to convert, but to genuinely get to know each other with an openness and respect. And it comes to the conclusion of there's no them, but only us. Now, I know what some of you all are thinking. Kayla, that sounds just like the similarities path. What's going on here? It's not, because I argue that in the similarities path, we're only looking at similarities. We push difference out the window because we're scared of it. But in this path, we're looking at the difference, we're looking at the similarity, we're marrying them together and see them both as equally as important. But this path is not a path that's usually taken. The first two paths that I discussed were the big ones because they're so easy. You can do them in a snap of a finger and go to bed and sleep well that night. This path requires two major things. It requires a steady ground and an openness. Now, by steady ground, I mean steady ground in our own tradition. Now, I'm not saying that you have to be an expert in your religion. I'm a Protestant, I have been my whole life, and I'm a theology student. And I want to say that after declaring theology as a major and having all these classes since sophomore year, I have more questions than answers. But if we're able to come together not feeling threatened, because when people ask you a question about your tradition, don't think, oh man, they don't believe it, I gotta lash out, that fight or flight response. They're genuinely wanting to know because they're coming from a similar aspect of respect. And we can't be afraid to go, you know what, buddy, I have no idea, but here's my theology behind it. What do you think? What would your tradition say? Things like that. And openness, fully coming together, fully open to the table. Now, this sounds kind of scary because a lot of us can't, do openness with significant others or even close friends, let alone a stranger at a table. But if we both come to this table together, both understanding that they are coming from a level of respect as much as you are, we can really get together. To wrap this up, Thomas Merton once said, that the beginning of love is to let those we love be perfectly themselves and not to twist them to fit our own image. Otherwise, we love only the reflection of ourselves we find in them. This is a challenge to myself and everyone watching and listening to this. If we are only able to get along by looking only at the reflection, or maybe putting on blinders to not see that reflection, we're going to get nowhere. Our community won't thrive. There will be more hurt feelings than good feelings. So when we look into this, we need to realize that we're both coming from a standard point of common humanity. And what I really want to drive home tonight is that it's okay to look in the past for wisdom. Merton is from the past, but his wisdom can impact our present and bring flourishing to our future. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you to all of our first speakers for the past. We are now going to bring the lights up and do an intermission for 10 minutes. We cannot let you back in, so please be in your chair after the 10 minutes are up. Thank you.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. Kind of got the nerves out of me. I feel good. I feel relaxed. If you guys want to, you can rub your shoulders too. We're going to be here. It's going to be great. All right, so now we're moving on to the present section. Our next speaker is going to use the art of storytelling. Please welcome fellow alumni, Chastity Gaines.
Know each other better. And the best way to do that is through storytelling. So I'll start with my story in the hopes that you'll tell yours. Growing up, I was a quiet, shy, introverted kid. I had a speech disorder, and I struggled with my communication skills. And since we have many facets of our identity, I was also a biracial child growing up in a black household. In many of the spaces within our city, and most of the media I consumed, whether it was television or video games, did not reflect my reality. So fast forward a few years later, and I'm at an event for Bellarmine University. And I'm trying to decide if this is the college for me to attend. And my mother is next to me. And during the event, I don't feel like I belong. And I think this might not be the college. But my mother makes me sit. And during that moment, I realized she was teaching me a very important lesson. The importance of sitting and taking up space, even when you feel like you don't belong. So when I got my acceptance letter to Bellarmine, I happily said yes. And so now I'm speaking to my advisor, trying to decide the best major for me, and she suggests communication, which might seem a little odd, but I was interested in marketing and web design. So the first course they gave me, as many of us know, is Public Speaking 101. And I want you to think for a second what you think of when you think of a public speaker. If you have to close your eyes, however you have to envision it. And it's probably not me. It's probably someone extroverted, very charismatic, and very outgoing. I want you to ask yourself, why is that? My first speech was on web design. And I passed, even though I may or may not have went over the time limit a little bit. But there was a comment left on the grade paper at the end that said, work on your eye contact more. And something so simple would prove to be so complicated for me because eye contact was not a natural, my body just naturally did not like to make eye contact. So as I'm sitting at home, practicing my speech in the mirror, I begin to ask myself the same thing I asked as that curious child. Why? Why am I doing this? And who determines these rules? Who determines this? And I would continue this questioning throughout my journey, whether it was when I was in college and I was told that you're too quiet, you won't survive the workforce. They were wrong. Oh, when I went to intern at a predominantly white ad agency, and I realized that many of the narratives they were telling was not reflective of the team. Or when I went to work in corporate, and I would be one of the only diverse members at the meetings, but I still sat there and I took up space because they were going to hear me. And when we think of stories and when we think of how they shape us, one of the biggest influences of that is media. And media looks a lot different now than it did 50, even 5 years ago. Who here gets their news from Twitter? I do. And I can watch the news live as it's happening with commentary. I can DM a friend on Twitter in Dubai, and she can respond to me in 30 seconds. That has never been able to happen in another period of our time. We can access information instantly on a global scale. And what this change, what this shift in media allowed, was for voices that were not previously heard to be heard at a large scale. And we saw this through social media, through a lot of political activism that occurred, such as Black Lives Matter. And during this time while I was on Twitter and noticing all these diverse communities and these stories coming up, I kind of stumbled upon a global media company called The Tempest. And The Tempest is a global media company for diverse millennial women, trans, and non-binary individuals. We have staff and contributors from 60+ countries across the world. Everyone from African American to Muslim American to Latino to Asian American, the list goes on and on and on. We were here and we were telling our stories the way they should have been told. What was originally strange about me, I realized was the norm. This was no different. It was there that I realized what it meant to belong and that I could pave my own narrative. I could do this as an introverted woman of color in these spaces. And it was there at The Tempest, together as a community, we found that. So I head up marketing, so I played an important role in how we tell our stories. I also mentor a team across the world. And it just always fascinates me how many stories go untold, how many things we consider strange or different that are actually the norm. The city is becoming increasingly diverse. The nation is becoming increasingly diverse, but many of our spaces do not reflect that. Everyone here can relate to some part of their narrative not being heard or listened to. I want you to embrace that. Embrace your story. I want you to have the same curiosity that you've always had to ask why you have to look like X or be like X to do X. Why, who says, and who determines that? Your story is the most powerful thing that you have. Your narrative is the most powerful thing that belongs to you. The last piece of advice that I have as we shape this nation, as we shape this city, tell your story.
Thank you, Chastity. Our next speaker is still in high school. Please give a big welcome to Allie Roberts, everyone.
I'm sure many of you have heard the saying, girls can do anything, but I'm here to tell you that that's not true. Women are faced with gender inequality in the STEM fields more than any other career in the world. STEM stands for science, technology, engineering, and math. Let me tell you a story. There was a girl who went to create her schedule for her junior year of high school. When she was asked what science class she wanted to take, she told them AP Physics or Advanced Placement Physics. And the male teacher who helped her create her schedule asked her if she was capable of taking the class. Now keep in mind, her grades in her other science classes were amazing, and she wasn't failing her math class. When she told them that she was capable, he said, "We just typically don't have a lot of girls in the class, and I want you to feel comfortable." Now, she thanks him for the warning that she might not feel comfortable, but that was the last thing she was worried about. Let me give you some numbers. 18% of college engineering majors are female, while over 60% of teenage girls report being interested in science. 48% of the United States STEM workforce is female. When people hear about gender bias or gender-based discrimination or gender stereotyping, STEM education typically doesn't come to the minds of many. STEM education is so important and so needed in this time, but it continues to be a male-dominated field. Over the course of my talk today, I hope to give you a look at the history of women in STEM, what we're doing now, and what we have to do in the future. Barack Obama once said, "One of the things that I really strongly believe in is that we need to have more girls interested in math, science, and engineering. We've got half the population that is way underrepresented in those fields, and that means we've got a whole bunch of talent not being encouraged the way they need to." On the first International Women's Day in 1911, we saw over 15,000 women march the streets of New York City demanding equal pay and gender equality. While we've gotten better pay, we still haven't gotten equal pay or achieved total gender equality. We still have to take action, and there are a few fields that need urgent action, such as the STEM career. Women are thriving in industries such as law, politics, and communication. However, women still only account for less than a quarter of the workforce in mathematical fields. In order to achieve the gender equality in STEM fields, the United Nations declared February 11th as the International Day of Women and Girls in Science, with aiming to achieve full and equal access and participation to science and math. The causes of gender equality in STEM education still remain unknown. The idea that women cannot perform jobs in STEM fields, but some still blame misogyny. The real problem is that women just don't partake in STEM activities for the fear of being judged or not listened to. When college professors were asked why there was a relative scarcity of female professors in math, science, and engineering, 74.5% said it was because of a lack of interest, while 24.5% blamed discrimination. Another problem women in the STEM careers face are stereotypes and mindsets. For example, a female student taking a math test might experience extra cognitive and emotional burden of worry related to the stereotype that women are bad at math. Many people claim they do not believe the stereotype that girls and women are not as good as boys and men in math and science. However, even individuals who consciously refute gender and science stereotypes can still hold that belief at an unconscious level. These unconscious beliefs or implicit biases may be more powerful than explicitly held beliefs and values simply because we are just not aware of them. Women and girls with fixed mindsets might believe that intelligence is static. In contrast, individuals with a growth mindset believe that intelligence can be developed. Because of this, they want to learn more, and therefore to embrace challenges, persist when they encounter obstacles, see effort as a path to mastery, learn from criticism, and be inspired from the success of others. Individuals with a fixed mindset are more susceptible to a loss of confidence when they encounter challenges. Because if they believe that they are truly smart, things will come to them. Individuals with growth mindsets, on the other hand, show a far greater belief in the power of effort, and in the face of difficulty, their confidence actually grows because they believe that they are learning and getting smarter as a result of challenging themselves. These research findings are important for women in STEM because encountering obstacles and challenging problems is in the nature of scientific work. When girls and women believe they have a fixed amount of intelligence, they're more likely to lose confidence and disengage from science and engineering when they inevitably encounter difficulties in their work. A growth mindset benefits these young women trying to pursue a STEM career. Therefore, we have to continue to encourage a growth mindset. You may be asking, what are we doing to combat the issue of gender inequality in STEM fields? Well, we're trying to do many things. We're trying to dismantle the stereotypes that women and girls face. We're trying to encourage girls and women to pursue STEM careers by implementing programs like Girls Who Code into schools. Right now in STEM careers, we're facing the biggest gender gap we ever have, and we're continuously searching for the reason why. Now, what can we do in the future in order to solve the gender gap in the STEM fields? We have to get women and girls interested in science and spread the word about achievements of women and girls in science. We have to teach students about the stereotypes and encourage them to get a growth mindset. We have to promote gifted and talented programs that help gifted students access STEM programs. And we have to help students develop their spatial skills, as well as help them realize that they have the potential to join a STEM field. We also have to encourage girls to take calculus, physics, chemistry, and engineering classes when they're available. So, in the end, why should we all be STEMinists? STEM is without a doubt one of the most important career fields. Without STEM, you wouldn't have the clothes you wear, the car you drive, or the cell phone you can never put down. We have to start encouraging young women and girls to join STEM careers so that no woman, like the woman I mentioned, is discouraged from joining a career in STEM. I can promise you that I will be a part of the generation of strong young women to change the STEM workforce, but we can't do it alone. In order to help eliminate the gender gap in STEM, we all have to act. Thank you.
She's still in high school, man. She's amazing. Yeah, she's smart. Anyway, our next speaker is a friend and fellow knight. Ladies and gentlemen, Nick Reinhardt.
Thanks, Casey. It's very fitting that today's the day that I speak to you all about this, because March 1st is the first day of Kidney Cancer Awareness Month, which is why I'm here. This is me on May 1st, 2017. I could talk to you all about how I had kidney cancer and I had to go through a whole bunch of things, but I don't think it matters. I think what really matters is what I learned from the experience, and that's what I want to share with you all today. A big thing that I've really thought about during my time in the hospital was about how we're influenced by where we are, who we meet, where we go. And as I thought about this TEDx, our theme is, who are we, past, present, and future? Took me back to the hospital and in the ICU with something that I wrote, which was this. I'm gonna read it off my phone. Life is about moments, incredible points of time, incredibly bad, or hopefully more often, incredibly good. As you look back on these moments, you can see how they shape your life. The friends you make, the jobs you take, the places you go, the things you do or don't do, the failures, the wins. Life would suck without these moments. It would be boring, too easy, or it'd be too predictable. So I'll take these moments, all of them, because they create this connected dots portrait of you and your beautiful life. As I look back on all these past moments, I have faith in my future moments, because I like the portrait that's being painted right now. Bellarmine played a part in becoming who I was before cancer, but it also continues to be a part of who I am today. When I was stuck, it's not stuck, excuse me, I was gonna say, when I was stuck in the ICU, I wrote that, but what really struck me after this situation was February of 2018. We had an alumni game, we were at Bellarmine Knights Hall. While we were there, I was sitting next to one of my professors, and it was Professor Linda Raymond, who I hope is here, maybe not. If not, she'll see the stream. So, and I sat there and I talked to her, and in the middle of the conversation, the announcer comes up and says, if you have been facing cancer or beaten cancer, please stand and be recognized. I'd never been in a public event where this was something that I could even participate in or feel like I should participate in. And so I turned to her and I said, is this me now? And I was very emotionally upset at that point. I started to have tears wells in my eye because I hadn't really posed that question before. And she said, Nick, what happens to you doesn't define you. You define what happens to you. And that's really kind of took me full circle. Took me full circle all the way back to when I was in the hospital. Because when I was in the hospital, I had a very clear-cut initiative. It was get up, survive, go to bed, do it again. That's what it was. It's very easy. But once you get into your day in and day out real life, you start having these adversities that you don't really realize are necessarily adversities. You have the alarm clock in the morning. You have the, am I eating the right food? Do you have the, willpower to go work out? I used some nights in that little sprint, little scene there. But that's what I started thinking about, is it took me full circle, because it was very simple when you're in the hospital. And when you're in the, your day in and day out life, those adversities are kind of hidden, and you have that kind of, okay, drudging on. Am I really, mining to get to those goals? And the answer is yes, you are. You have the ability and power to change your life every single day. And it's in those moments that you make those decisions to say, yes, I answer the call first time on the alarm. Yes, I went to work out today. Yes, I ate the right foods. And I chose this because that's me about 10 years ago, and that's me about 3 weeks ago. Big change there. College. But you have these impulses, and the reaction's up to you. But what I challenge you to do is, when you have these impulses and these adversities, you have these things, these ups, these downs, these goods, these bads, to rise to the occasion and be your own hero and react the way that the person that you would want to be would. Sounds kind of weird, I know that. But what I'm saying is, I try to be the person that the person 10 years ago would look up to today. And I'm proud of who I am today. I know that 15-year-old me would be proud of me. And I like that a lot. And that's what motivates me to keep going on a day in and day out basis. It's not easy to do, which is why I have this hat on. It's grit, which I got from Angela Duckworth's book, Grit. And it stands for perseverance and passion for long-term goals. But one of my friends also pointed out to me that greatness resides in tenacity. And that also stuck with me and is a symbol for grit. And that's why I surround myself with these symbols, is because these symbols are again, that extra push to rise up, to fight that fight, to go a little bit harder, go one more. I wear this on my wrist, it says stay positive. When I'm stressed out at work and I maybe don't want to make that last call, I'll give it a flick. And I make the last call. I need to start doing that in the morning a little more. But yeah, you got to surround yourself with these symbols. I think that's how it makes being who you want to be easier. And they're so critical to have those symbols, to have these things that you fall back on. But you can't do it with just symbols alone, right? You have to have your propellants. These are my propellants. These are a lot of people who are here for me during some tough times. That's my mom on Mother's Day in the hospital. So shout out to you, Mom, for being there. I know that there's a lot more fun things that you could do that day, but, I'm glad you were there. You got to surround yourself with propellants. You got to surround yourself with people who are going to pick you up and let you go that extra mile, who are going to pick you up when you are down, or who are going to tell you you're not acting right. This isn't you. Be better. You got to have those people that are going to be there to push you, and not those dilutants, the people who are going to bring you down and say, whatever. Nick, you did this today. I don't like that. That's just not me. I need my rocket fuel. I started with a quote that I wrote while I was in the hospital. I'm going to finish with a quote that I wrote when I was in the hospital. After discussing with a friend today, I think there are two kinds of people in this world. There are people who believe they fight every single day to win the day, and there are people who believe that you are slowly dying from the moment you're born. Those who fight daily will likely do more with their days than anyone else, and will use all of their near-death experiences to justify that they will change the world. Because if they weren't going to, then one of those experiences would have already finished them off by now. This person will treat the world as it could be, so will become as it should be. The one who views slowly dying will be someone who will always settle, who will never go the extra mile, who will die hesitating, will treat the world as it is, and because of that, it will be never more. Who do you want to be? When I wrote that, I was really mad at one of my friends. I was really mad at him. He texted me something that I just couldn't believe he texted me. And what that brought up a great point, and jumping back to my dilutants, is I said, hey, man, I'll talk to you later. That's just what it is. You got to cut dilutants out of your life. But also when I wrote this, I realized who I was. I realized that I wanted to fight every single day. I challenge you to do things because they're hard. I challenge you to know that you are the sum of your decisions. I challenge you to fight. You are who you want to be, so be it.
I do believe we have some amazing speakers here today. Wouldn't you agree? Yes. Thank you. Goodness. I was like, wow. Okay. So our next speaker walks everywhere, even to campus. The students call him Dr. T. Please give a big welcome to Dr. Thomas.
In the spring of 2014, I accepted a tenure-track position in the exercise science department at Bellarmine University. I had recently earned my PhD from the University of Illinois and was eager to begin this new chapter in my life. Although, to be honest, I wasn't entirely sure what to expect when it came to living in Louisville, Kentucky. It didn't take long, however, for me to fall head over heels for this wonderful city, a place that has this unique blend of Midwestern politeness and Southern hospitality. Indeed, this is an area of peerless beauty, with an incredible history, all of which contribute to an incredibly distinctive cultural identity. This is a place that is unique, quirky, and weird in all the best possible ways. It's a people who are welcoming, energetic, and proud. Indeed, there are many superlatives and nicknames associated with this fine city. Fall City, River City, Derby City. We're known for bourbon and basketball. It's a city of compassion, creativity, innovation, and of course, greatness. 5 years later, I too am proud to call this wonderful city my home. I've grown to love it, I fiercely defend it, and I passionately support it. This is how I sincerely feel as a resident of Louisville, Kentucky. As a behavioral scientist, on the other hand, and certainly as a concerned citizen, no less, I do recognize that this place is not without its faults, especially when it comes to health-related outcomes. Any way you look at it, in terms of preventable conditions or early mortality, Kentucky consistently ranks in the top 10 worst or bottom 10 best in the nation. I share this information not to upset or embarrass or to discourage anyone, but rather to highlight the fact that there's a silver lining to all of this. That is, when you're at rock bottom, you have nowhere to go but up. As a behavioral scientist, I find this to be incredibly encouraging, as the time for system-wide intervention is ripe. But I still understand that taken as a whole, these challenges may seem quite insurmountable. Often, it isn't the mountains ahead that wear you out. It's the little pebble in your shoe. Indeed, we can overcome these challenges and improve as individuals and as a society. What we can do in order to move forward is engage in greater amounts of walking behavior, in physical activity. Now, please understand, I'm not selling exercise specifically, but rather more engagement in a physically active lifestyle. And perhaps one of the best ways in which we can do this is via engagement in walking for leisure and transportation. But this city and state greatly struggle relative to leading physically active lifestyles, and we can experience considerable challenges in terms of actual walking. Right? Unfortunately, there's limited to no statewide policies designed to support active lifestyles, which may contribute to some of these poor values or rankings that you see here in front of you today. As a result, it's important for us to further examine our social determinants of health. That is, the conditions in which we live, play, work, and age. How might such factors serve as potential impediments or facilitators to behaviors like walking? Well, if we look at standards for walkable communities, we see that Kentucky falls short in every single category. But has it always been like this? What we see here is an image of downtown Louisville at the beginning of the 20th century. Everything that you see in black here is a building of some sort or a structure. Near the end of the 20th century, things looked quite different. Buildings were bulldozed, communities destroyed, all to make room for the mighty automobile. Here's another image we have, this time downtown, looking south from the Glass Works building. This picture was taken in 1926, prior to urban renewal. This is the same view just 50 years later. Indeed, like many American cities, Louisville has often built for cars rather than people. And unfortunately, it's a trend that still seems to continue today. This is a wonderful illustration that highlights how we've really sort of surrendered this once public space almost entirely to cars, essentially pushing people off to the side, onto the sidewalks. That's if they're lucky to have a sidewalk to begin with. Now, please understand, I'm not necessarily anti-car, all right? But what I do take issue with is the fact that we've historically prioritized the movement of cars over the movement and subsequent well-being of our people. Indeed, this is a car-centric city, and many of us suffer from a car-centric mindset, making engagement in active transportation quite difficult, especially for walkers. If we do choose to walk, we're often forced to make risky decisions, or we're faced with unnecessary barriers along our way. It's no surprise, then, that Kentucky has been identified as one of the top 20 most dangerous states for pedestrians. But it doesn't have to be this way. On March 18th, 1958, a man by the name of Thomas Merton found himself walking the streets of our city. During this walk, he experienced a sudden insight that led him to redefine his monastic identity with greater involvement in social justice issues. In Louisville, at the corner of 4th and Walnut, in the center of the shopping district, I was suddenly overwhelmed with the realization that I loved all these people, that they were mine and I theirs, that we could not be alien to one another, even though we were total strangers, all walking around, shining like the sun. A beautiful sentiment, no doubt. But I wonder if Thomas Merton would have experienced that same revelation if he was driving along Spaghetti Junction, as opposed to walking through town that day, where he saw the sun shine bright. A notion, of course, that is near and dear to the hearts of all Kentuckians. But perhaps it's more than just a pretty lyric to our famed state song, but rather a descriptor of this place, its people, and their potential. Indeed, there are many exciting and innovative things happening throughout the city to help communities become more active, lead healthier lives, and reach their fullest potential. I wish I had the time to go through every single one of these organizations and feature the amazingly passionate leaders and individuals who support them. I wish I could tell you more about Move Louisville, which is a vision and action plan for multimodal transportation throughout the city to try to make a more connected and sustainable transportation network. I would love to tell you more about Healthy Louisville 2025, a currently being developed community health improvement plan being spearheaded by Louisville Metro Department of Public Health and Wellness, along with some concerned community citizens. I regret not being able to tell you more about the encouraging Bardstown Road Safety Study, which has the noble aim of improving mobility and safety for all its users along one of the greatest commercial stretches within our city. Indeed, there is a lot going on, such as the continued development of the Louisville Loop, a planned 110-mile recreational path that will entirely encompass this city, or the recent completion of the Big Four pedestrian bridge, a former rail bridge crossing the Ohio River that now connects pedestrians from Louisville, Kentucky to Jeffersonville, Indiana. Or perhaps information about the continued development of Waterfront Park, bringing this once neglected area back to the people. We even have our very own Open Streets program, known here as Cycluvia, trying to promote engagement in active transportation and support economic development. It has become my life's work to help promote physical activity across the lifespan, and I have a unique passion for walking advocacy. In this effort, I hope to have God on my side, but I must have Kentucky. So on behalf of the walking movement and pedestrians everywhere, come walk with us and we'll show you the way to a brighter tomorrow, starting today. Walking united for what's good and what's right, displaying our passions, our will, and our might. We'll walk for the health of both body and mind, outcomes of value to all humankind. We'll walk for the sick and we'll walk for the poor. We'll walk to engage and we'll walk to explore. We'll defend those who walk so as not to lose sight that basic mobility is a God-given right. So stand on up and answer the call. Let's take that first step forward for one and for all. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. T. It's time we need to get walking, but not here. You're going to sit down. So, for our next speaker, she's a licensed acupuncturist and herbalist. Please give it up for Andrea Hilton.
Thank you. Hello, everybody. Good evening. As I said, my name's Andrea Hilton. I'm a licensed acupuncturist and herbalist here in Louisville, and I'm going to be speaking about acupuncture, the opioid epidemic, and a new model for pain management. So let's get started with some really crazy statistics. About 130 people will die every day from an opioid overdose. We represent about 5% of the world population in the United States, and yet we consume about 80% of the world's opium production. About 30% of patients who are prescribed opioids will eventually develop some kind of addictive disorder. It is a $78.5 billion economic burden on the country. But as we know, opioids are prescribed to manage pain, so let's look at pain. There are about 60 million people in the United States right now with a diagnosis of chronic pain, and this is a $560 billion annual economic burden in the United States. This is a problem. The opioid epidemic was declared a public health emergency in 2017. As we know, chronic pain has been an issue for far longer. We have reduced opioid prescriptions, but people are still struggling with pain and addiction. When they can't get prescriptions, they turn to illegal drugs, most often heroin. So the real emergency, our healthcare system is simply not equipped to deal with pain management right now. So needless to say, we need a solution. This has been lined out by the CDC. They have a 5-point plan to combat the opioid epidemic, and this is kind of the gist of it. They want the solutions to be safe. They want them to be effective. They need to be really easy to implement because our country has enough going on right now that we've got to work on. It needs to be affordable, but most notably, it needs to treat addiction, but it really needs to get to the root of the situation, which is pain management. So, how do we address pain? The core of the solution, the core of solution begins with a paradigm shift on how we're viewing and treating pain. We need a new medical model for pain management because what we're doing right now simply isn't working. So let's look at the current model for pain management. The first principle is that pain is bad, full stop. The only goal is to eliminate pain, even if that means only masking it. Our society is attached, it's even addicted, you could say, to quick fixes and magic pills. We are utterly dependent upon the pharmaceutical industry right now. What's worse is that patients are very rarely given exit strategies for stopping pain pills. They are pretty much just told, here you go, good luck, we'll see what happens. Injections and surgeries are options, but are expensive and they come with their own side effects. The healthcare industry is getting a little bit better about recommending more physical modalities that actually try to treat pain, like chiropractic, physical therapy, massage, and acupuncture. But as we know, access to these modalities is incredibly limited. If any of you look at your health insurance policy, chances are you'll get maybe 10 visits that insurance will help cover, but even getting that pre-certification is a nightmare on its own. Relying on pills makes patients passive in their healing. The only guidance they're given is, take this pill and just wait till you take the next one. They are very rarely educated on why they're in pain and what they can do to reverse it. There has to be a better way. So I'm recommending a new model for pain management. First, pain is not the bad guy. Pain is just a messenger. It's telling us that something is off balance and requires attention. The first step is learning the language of pain and listening to it so we can figure out what's causing it. And let me tell you, there is always a cause for pain. Anytime that a doctor tells you that we don't know why you're in pain, that's just because not enough time has been taken to actually really get to the source of it. The goal is then to reverse the causes of pain and then learn the necessary tools to prevent pain in the future. The focus is on the healing process itself. It lets go of the quick fix mentality and embraces healing as an active journey. Even though it takes time, the end result is much more satisfying because we've not only gotten rid of pain, but we've actually healed and learned to maintain health and well-being. When we approach pain management this way, the patient and the doctor are partners, and through active participation, the patient becomes empowered. So what system is already in place that kind of fits this model? I've mentioned chiropractic and physical therapy and massage, and they are fantastic, but acupuncture is my focus because it is the only modality that can simultaneously treat both pain management and addiction. It is an evidence-based and non-pharmaceutical approach to pain management. It is very safe when it's actually done by a licensed acupuncturist, and I do want to take a quick moment to talk about acupuncture training. Most acupuncturists have gone to the four-year master's program, 3,000 hours of classroom education, about 1,000 hours of clinical residency. We are trained in anatomy, physiology, pathology, pharmacology. It's not pseudoscience, it produces health professionals. Acupuncture is very effective, as I said, for both pain and addiction. There is a vast growing body of research demonstrating acupuncture's effectiveness for acute and chronic pain, and there is an emerging body of research coming out indicating acupuncture's effectiveness for addiction. It would also be incredibly easy to implement into our current healthcare practices. All we need is to make it an essential healthcare benefit. So how does acupuncture treat pain? First and foremost, it stimulates endorphins, which helps relieve the sensation of pain. It decreases inflammation. It increases circulation. It can relax muscle and tissue fibers. It enhances tissue repair. So if there's been sort of injury, tear, strain, sprain, it can actually speed up the healing process. And even more important, it helps reduce stress and emotionally based pain. In terms of addiction, acupuncture can help both with physical and psychological addiction. Specific protocols can help curb cravings, reduce withdrawal symptoms, and actually help the body detoxify. Acupuncture also works on the nervous system to decrease the stress response and increase the relaxation response. In total, acupuncture can help addicts navigate rehabilitation, reduce the stress associated with it, while also managing pain. And lastly, acupuncture fully embraces this active model that I spoke about. In our model, pain is a messenger. It gives us value information about the causes of pain. Pain relief is just the first step. The journey ends with wholly restoring the person's health. The focus is on the healing process, which I mentioned earlier. It gives patients the time and tools they need to really find themselves again. In other words, the healing doesn't just happen to them. They are active in healing themselves. It's not as easy as taking pills. It requires change, it requires work, and it requires patience. But it does help us lead healthy and fulfilling lives. We come out on the other end not just pain-free, but integrated, whole, and balanced. I want to close with this. We have everything we need within us to lead healthy and fulfilling lives. If we can resist the urge to escape and stay present and mindful, we can become empowered and live empowered lives. What lies behind us and before us are tiny matters compared to what lies within us. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much to all the present speakers. We're going to do another intermission here. This will be our final intermission, and it will last 10 minutes. Thank you.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. Now we're going to head into our final section. I just want to let you guys know that the TEDx represents a few things. T represents technology, E, entertainment, D, design, and the X represents an independently organized event, which this is. Here at Bellarmine University, we just want to say the value of spreading ideas. It's very worth it. Now, to go into the future section, I'm going to bring out our next speaker. Our next speaker's name is Mary Wirtz.
Hi, everyone. According to legend, the emperor, Charlemagne, once said that to know a second language is to possess a second soul. Sounds hokey, right? Charlemagne was the first emperor of the Holy Roman Empire, located in modern-day Germany around the late 8th century of the Common Era. But when Charlemagne first made this grand allegation around the year 800, he couldn't have predicted things like mass communication on a global scale through the World Wide Web. He couldn't have predicted that centuries later, the forces of globalization would connect people who speak different languages instantaneously, and that these languages would be changed by these interactions. He couldn't have imagined digital translation technologies like Google Translate, where you can type a phrase in one language, and the computer program will spit the same phrase back out in a different language, from French to Yoruba. All of the words that we've invented in the past 2 decades, words like Facebook, FOMO, selfie, and app, would have been totally unrecognizable to him. So really, what can one man who lived more than 1,000 years ago, who wouldn't even know what a computer is, tell us about language in the 21st century? Some recent research out of the University of Dusseldorf from 2015 reveals just how small and interconnected our global community has become. 14% of people, or 1 in 7 people worldwide, speak Mandarin Chinese as their primary language. The second most widely spoken, English, boasts 527 million speakers and 1.5 billion learners. But the fact that surprised me the most is 2/3 of all people alive today speak one of just 12 of the world's most commonly spoken languages. And we're talking out of 7,000, more or less, on the planet. So between these digital translators and lingua francas like Mandarin, English, Spanish, and Hindi, many would argue that learning languages has become less relevant today, especially as universities begin to phase foreign language out of their general education curricula. They'd say that the wistful spiritual attitude of Charlemagne is just a relic of the past. Yeah, our grandparents, our great-grandparents, they took French or Latin or whatever in school. But all we need is Google Translate, and an assumption that wherever we travel on this vast planet, someone nearby will likely speak English. Now, I can definitely speak to all of the scientific studies demonstrating the values of being bilingual. Studies show time and time again that bilingual people have greater mental acuity because of the task of balancing multiple languages at the same time. A recent study out of Northwestern University shows that bilingual children have better focus in the classroom and they're better at filtering out background noise. One report I saw from the Department of Education purports that bilingual children are better at logic, decision-making, math, memory, and even going on to learn other languages. For me, personally, I've just always kind of had a knack for language. You know, for some people it's math, and for others it's writing, and for me it's language. But the reason that I've devoted my academic career and even part of my own personal time to studying other languages is not because of the benefits that I already know I am reaping. Rather, I see it as an act of service to others. What do I mean by that? Well, frankly, it all kind of starts with dongo, which naturally is the Korean slang word for butthole. So much of my worldview has been impacted by some friendships I made with international students at my high school in Northern Kentucky, Villa Madonna Academy. It was my sophomore year of high school, and in my geometry class, I was seated next to two girls from South Korea named Eve and Haewon. I didn't know Eve or Haewon very well at this point, but every day before class started, I'd watch over their shoulders as they watched news clips and TV highlights from back at home on their school-issued iPads. I was terribly curious to know what was going on in all of these clips, so one day I just inserted myself into one of their conversations. They were happy to answer any questions that I had, but we were both surprised when I went home and I looked up the music that they'd recommended me, and I came back the next day asking for more suggestions, because oops, I'd gotten into K-pop along the way. So now before geometry started each day, even Haewon slowly began to teach me Hangul, which is the Korean writing script. Hangul was developed by King Sejong in the 16th century as a way of increasing literacy among the common people, and therefore it was specifically designed to be easy for people to pick up, but don't worry, I struggled with it for a couple of weeks. Slowly, I learned how to write out Haewon and Eve's Korean name, Jiwon, and they gave me a few words or phrases of the day, and yes, one of those words was butthole, because we were indeed 15 years old. But at first this was just a much needed distraction from geometric proofs and equations, but as I started to think about the choices that my friends and their parents made for their schooling, I started to take this a bit more seriously. See, at this point, I'd never been away from home for more than a week, and never out of the country. My friends, on the other hand, left home at 14 years of age to come to my home, the United States, to learn my language, my culture, and my customs. Naturally, the impact that going to high school abroad would have had on their college and career prospects were immense, but I was nevertheless moved by the courage and the resilience that they demonstrated at such a young age, and I still am. I studied in Spain for a month last summer, and while I loved my time abroad, I struggled with homesickness every single day. My friends did this every day for 4 years, and I have nothing but love and gratitude for what they accomplished and the friendships that we developed over those years. That being said, learning Korean is hard work. I have made mistakes and embarrassed myself plenty of times. I've tried to study it on my own with only modest success, but I do keep trying. And I keep trying because to learn another person's language is to step outside of yourself and into the soul of another. To learn another person's language is to meet that person exactly where they are. When I volunteer as a Spanish medical interpreter, or I speak to one of my professors here in very broken Korean, it's my way of trying to say that although English is the dominant language here in the United States, I would never expect someone to change their way of life or to forsake their culture to better convenience me. It's hospitality to the quote-unquote other. It's the least we can do. I don't want to reinvent the wheel, though, because the ancient Greeks were pretty smart dudes and ladies, not that we remember them, and they had a word for what I'm talking about, and that word is agape. It translates roughly to pure self-gift, and that comes from the theologian Michael J. Himes. It's different from philia, brotherly love, and it's different from eros, selfish love. It's the kind of love which gifts and expects nothing in return, not even increased mental acuity or a line on your resume. It's humble love, it's giving love, it's selfless love. Taking no. Digital translators and common tongues like Mandarin and English, these facilitate trade and aid communication so that we are even more connected than we already were before. But taking the time to learn another language, be it through a class, an app, or baptism by fire when you're studying abroad, this isn't going away. It was relevant to Charlemagne, it's relevant today, and it will be relevant in the lifetimes to come. Taking the time to learn another language may feel old school, but this is our future, because love is our future, our shared common language, the language we never have to learn. Thank you.
Thank you, Mary. Our next speaker is the co-founder and CEO of Ideas X Lab. Please welcome Josh Miller.
So it's been really tremendous over the past few years to see the research and the movements taking place across our nation that are focused on hope. And one in particular that I'm reminded of is President Barack Obama's campaign that was a movement of hope that inspired us to think about what is the nation that we want and that we're worthy of, and how do we come together to fight for it. And so as we've seen how transformational the power of hope can be, it has become a core part of our work at Ideas X Lab, where we leverage the power of arts and culture to support communities as they drive towards improved health and well-being. And it was during an urban-rural exchange with middle and high school students a few years ago in Robinson Forest, where we came together and were going through some artist-led engagements, and we were asking these young people about hope, and some of them said, "Hope is dangerous. Hope always fails you." And so as we were sitting around the fire that night, I was thinking about my past as a young person, and could I think about and identify the places where I saw hope in the past for me and how that had impacted me. And so as I'm talking about hope, I'm talking about hope related to hope theory, which comes out of research from Dr. Snyder and others and breaks down hope into three components. Can you set goals for yourself in the future that are uncertain? Can you envision multiple pathways, A, B, C, maybe all the way to path Z, that you need to go down to achieve your goals? And do you have the agency? So the necessary strength and the ability to rally resources to be able to achieve what you're seeking to accomplish. And so as I was thinking about that, my mind went to the summer before my junior year of high school. So this was the summer when I was outed as being gay to my parents. And so for the next year, my parents and the church and school and myself were in a bit of a battle of can and how can Josh show up as himself? Can he? And the answer was no. And so by the time we got to the beginning of my senior year, we were at an impasse. And so there were two pathways that were ones that I had to choose between. And so one was to move out and to stay in the area close to my siblings. I'm the oldest of 5, close to my friends, but with no savings and potentially no place to live, and maybe not even a school to graduate from. Or path B, to move in with family in southern Indiana. My aunt is with me here tonight. And to be able to finish high school. And so as I was reflecting on what hope meant for me, the goal that I had set for myself was to graduate from college, because I knew in my understanding of the world at that point was that would be how I created a successful future for myself. And so as we think about hope in this context, I want you all to think just for a moment about a decision or a goal you made in the past, and to think about all of the steps that you had to go to achieve that, and then imagine if you didn't set goals at all, because life, those circumstances has taught you that it was too dangerous. And so as we've done our work in Louisville Smoketown neighborhood and other communities through our Heal Community approach, we've seen how arts and culture can bring community together to identify priorities and action plans for change. And so in Louisville, in Smoketown specifically, we heard beautification and safety were two of the priorities. And so as we went to understand what that meant, we learned that it was about the concentrated outdoor advertising in the neighborhood. So Smoketown is the oldest African-American neighborhood in the state of Kentucky. It's over 152 years old. And like many marginalized communities, there's a heavy concentration of outdoor ads that look like these for gun shows, for drug-sniffing dogs, for cheap lawyers. And the research actually shows that this concentration of advertising creates a social toxin. And so to combat that, we created an initiative called One Poem at a Time. So this was created by artist Hannah Drake along with our team members at Ideas X Lab, and we replaced a whole series of billboards with photographs that I took of community and community members and paired them with one-lines of poetry. And to kick off this initiative, we held a historical poetry walk. So as we walked around with stakeholders and with policymakers past the new billboards and the existing ones, we were hearing from poets about the cultural heritage of the neighborhood and thinking about how, as a neighborhood, we could come together collectively around policy change to impact this type of advertising. And so as this initiative was taking place, we looked across the street and all of a sudden, 2 liquor stores, new signs popped up. And they had both applied for liquor licenses and no one had been notified. And so the neighborhood, already having come together, shifted its policy focus. And what we wanted to do was to impact and defeat those liquor stores from those licenses being made available. And what we wanted to do in addition to that was to impact the policy of how residents are notified that someone has applied to be able to sell alcohol. And so our neighborhood came together and rallied and submitted over 5,000 letters to Frankfurt and went to meetings at Louisville Metro Hall. And we were able to successfully make the argument with data from the Louisville Health Equity Report about why our neighborhood didn't need additional resources for alcohol. And those 2 liquor stores were both defeated. Then we saw the policy change. So now these huge yellow neon signs are required if you apply to be able to sell alcohol. And so a few months later, Family Dollar stores across Louisville, over 20 of them, all applied for liquor licenses. Now, they weren't in Smoketown, but they were in many other communities who did not need additional places for people to purchase alcohol. And so those communities partnered with the leaders from our community who led this charge and were able to defeat all of those liquor licenses from being granted. And so when we talk about the power of arts and artists and of culture to drive change in community, this is a really tremendous example of seeing how that capacity can be built when so many people come together. And this has just been the beginning for us. So at Mazik Middle School, we've been working with a group of artists and young people who came together around environmental health. And so they designed a comic book together that serves as their policy recommendation paper for what they want to impact in the environment. And the superheroes and sheroes are designed and inspired by community members and their students from the school. And this was something that they were able to present to the Board of Education as a demonstration of learning. These are the policies that we believe we can change both in our school and in the community. And in the Justice League, which is an after-school program that's also artist-led, young people are coming together around social justice, and they're organizing to participate in the National School Walkout after the Parkland shooting, and they've demonstrated a change from 6.3 to 9 on a 10-point scale in their ability to advocate for themselves and for others by participating in a co-creation process together. And so as we think about a national movement around hope, we see things like the Aspen Institute and their partners releasing a report and starting a movement that looks at how we can take holistic approaches to engaging young people. How are we addressing social, emotional, and academic learning, which is very much in line with the work that we are now starting to do here in Louisville, which is a 2-year co-creation process where artists and young people are coming together to co-create projects to cultivate hope and to impact emotional well-being with the creation of something replicable like a toolkit coming out of it so that it can be scaled even more broadly. And this is building on the process evaluation that University of Louisville's Commonwealth Institute of Kentucky conducted on our Heal Community approach that showed that this type of model can support collective identity development and capacity building, community engagement, and the cultivation of hope. And so as we have been designing this project, we're working with U of L's Center for Creative Place Healing to do the research on this 2-year initiative as we move forward. And one of the things that's really important to us is to think about the artists that we engage. And how are we thinking about the intersectional identities of the young people that we're working with? And can they envision themselves in those artists? And can that serve as a way for them to envision a new future for themselves? And so one of the things that I read recently was a letter to my son by Ta-Nehisi Coates. And it says, "My wish for you is that you feel no need to constrict yourself to make other people comfortable." And this is very much in line with how we think about engaging young people and engaging and inspiring people to drive change. And so my team member, Hannah Drake, has a poem called Power, where she says, "There is someone waiting for you to be all you can be so that they can be all that they can be." And all of this reminds me of why it is so important to show up, as I do, in these types of spaces as a gay man in makeup who's androgynous. Because if we don't have people that can demonstrate a new way forward, how are we ever going to be able to make that type of change? And so as we look to seeing these young people coming together to advocate for policy change through poetry and petitioning the superintendent to be able to participate in a walkout because of arts and culture-based programming that they've created, we see tremendous potential for the future. And so I'll close with saying there's a quote from Edith Wharton that says, "There are 2 ways of spreading light, to be the candle or the mirror that reflects it." And so as I think about community building and building a culture of hope, being the candle or the mirror that reflects it, I see as one of the roles for artists as we move forward in creating a future worthy of both our efforts and our lives. Thank you.
Thank you, Josh Miller. The future is ours. Our next speaker goes by the name of John Walzak.
I believe there's never been a more important time in the history of our planet for the role of a modern accredited zoo. Of course, I'm a little bit biased, so I'd like to share with you a few stories to help you understand why that is my belief. Imagine that you're a 4-month-old polar bear cub living on Alaska's North Slope in an incredibly harsh environment. You're separated from your mother. You haven't been taught to hunt or to fish. And making matters worse, you haven't been eating, so you're half the body weight that you should be. Fog's rolling in, and there's an adult male polar bear in your vicinity, and they do cannibalize. Luckily for this little bear, there were some research biologists watching her for the last 24 hours, and they rushed in to rescue her. U.S. Fish and Wildlife and polar bear experts now had the chore of trying to find the very best home for Kunnick's future. They chose the Louisville Zoo. We had just completed a state-of-the-art exhibit with wonderful support facilities. We had a staff that had decades of polar bear experience. And one critical factor is that we were accredited by the Association of Zoos and Aquariums. This is the gold standard, which looks at our animal welfare, our conservation efforts, our education efforts, and everything that we do. This is Kunnick's story and her arrival to Louisville.
Kunnick was discovered on the day that we opened Glacier Run. She was on the North Slope on the Kunnick oil field, and she was an orphan cub. She comes from a place that is very desolate. It's one of the hardest environments in the world to survive in. And she was tough enough to make it long enough to get here so she could share her story.
This is Cunnick's home. The exhibits that we design are critical to the animal welfare, and Glacier Run provides great resources both on exhibit and off, and we create storylines with every exhibit in modern zoos to make sure that we could connect people to what's happening with polar bears. Zoo exhibits historically were one exhibit and a few bedrooms. The animals went off and onto that same exhibit. The Louisville Zoo 20 years ago revolutionized the profession with an exhibit called Islands that created multiple exhibits in multiple spaces for multiple species. We enriched their environment. We gave them choices. And to make this all happen, we had to build relationships with the zookeeper and the animal through operant conditioning to move them through these spaces, which improved those relationships and improved the care for all of these animals. Importantly, Cunnick, she was born at a tough time for polar bears, threatened species. But she was fortunate that zoos had evolved to the point where they could do excellent work in caring for them. Now she's a wonderful ambassador where people could come and learn about her story at a town that replicates a village on the edge of the Arctic Circle, where people have learned to live in balance with the top of a food chain predator, the polar bear, and also be watchful of the environment around them. A little more diminutive animal that almost didn't have this opportunity is a black-footed ferret. This species was twice thought to be extinct until in 1980, a border collie named Shep brought a carcass back to his ranch owner in Meeteetse, Wyoming. Shep led us to a population of 18 black-footed ferrets. Out of those 18, only 11 were founder stock. The federal fish and wildlife officials, state officials, and zoos got together, a handful of folks, to work out their husbandry, to reproduce them, and reintroduce them, creating a sustainable plan to get these ferrets to exist in the remnant wild. The Louisville Zoo, coming from 11 animals, has reproduced over 1,100 black-footed ferrets. More than half of those have been reintroduced into the remnant wild. And the real success is we now have over 300 black-footed ferrets existing in the North American prairie and thriving. But this begs the question, what about all the other species? What about all the other habitats? These are stories that move us, that inspire us to try and do more, to try and tell these stories, to try and save more species. But we have challenges. The world population is increasing. There are more needs for energy and natural resources. More people are moving to urban centers than ever before in the history of the planet. And along with that comes a lot of complex situations and commensurate stress. We're also becoming more and more connectedly disconnected. People communicate to each other indirectly through devices, and they certainly are connecting less and less with nature. The Earth's population is now 7.5 billion. It has increased threefold in the last 3 generations. Experts predict that by the year 2050, the population will be 10 billion from the 7.5 billion on Earth today. Biodiversity has decreased by half in the last 40 years. We're losing our wildlife, and animals that are thriving are those that could coexist within human systems, finding the opportunity for food and shelter with the development that we create. And this could very well be our wildlife of our future. So who is stepping up? Who is taking on this challenge to let us know this story, to help save endangered species, to help educate all so we could start considering what is our planetary role? How are we going to be part of this balance? The Association of Zoos and Aquariums is a big part of that answer.
We are advocates and defenders. We are champions and friends. We are deep sea divers and river riders. We are scientists and researchers, and so much more. We are the Association of Zoos and Aquariums, 230 strong accredited members who go to work to ensure the conservation of our precious wildlife in their home and in our care. Visit aza.org/join us to find your local accredited aquarium or zoo.
The Louisville Zoo is just one of that 230. Imagine the power that they could create in getting people to reconnect with each other, to get unplugged and spend quality time together, and then reconnect with nature with great animal ambassadors like Cunnick. The zoos, accredited zoos, are a place where we can motivate advocates. Out of the 190 million guests that attend U.S. zoos and aquariums every year, this can be the scene of our future leaders, helping bring this message forward. Most people don't realize this, but zoos on an annual basis and aquariums attract more guests than all major U.S. sporting events combined. So, what can we do? How can we be part of this? How can we participate? And how can accredited zoos and aquariums make a difference to help us make sure that these precious species are here for generations to come? Back at the beginning of the environmental movement in the late 1960s, I think it was best summarized by a Senegalese conservationist named Baba Diome. And what he said is, in the end, we will conserve only what we love, we will love only what we understand, and we'll understand only what we are taught. And that's what accredited zoos and aquariums do. I leave you with a thought: what will be your planetary legacy? Thank you.
Thank you, John. As you can see here, there are many great people here in Louisville doing active work to secure our future and to make the world a better place. So I'm just thankful we could get them all in one room, and I know there's more, but this is all we could get. Sorry, it's a full list. But our next speaker is Reverend Caitlin Simpson.
Let me start by saying that I never wanted to be the gay pastor. I never wanted to stand out. But here I am, standing in front of you in all of my gay pastoral glory. But I wasn't always open about my sexual orientation. It wasn't until one night in 2012, I was standing outside, locked in deep conversation with God. I had just finished my first semester of seminary, where I was training to become an ordained member of clergy. And at that point, I had spent 10 long, shame and fear-filled years in the closet. And I was at my breaking point. I wasn't asking God if I was gay. I knew that I was. And I wasn't asking God for forgiveness. I wasn't asking to be spared from the hell that I had been taught I would go to just for being gay. I can remember this moment so clearly. I looked up at the sky, through the stars to the great beyond, and I asked God to kill me. It was not the first time that I had considered suicide while in the closet, but it was the first time that I had tried to solicit God as an accomplice. And I was so earnest in my request, so entrenched in my belief of God as all-powerful, that I actually asked for a lightning bolt. I asked God to send a lightning bolt from above and strike me dead then and there. And I even closed my eyes and waited. And when I opened my eyes and realized that I was still alive, I took that as permission from God. Permission to not only come out, but to also continue to lean into my call into ministry. 7 years later, here I am, and I'm still coming out. I come out to new classes that I teach, to new members at church or new friends, or to TED Talk audiences. Coming out is joyful and fearful and exhilarating and exhausting. I have since been ordained as openly gay. I have both been granted and denied employment as openly gay. And I continue to be systematically judged by faith leaders and secular folks alike, all while trying to make sense of the painful, exclusive, yet well-meaning theology of my childhood. A theology that taught me that despite being told that God loved us all, each and every one, that really what we were learning is that God had conditional love. Because when we put stipulations on love or acceptance, then that is conditional. Because what we're saying is that we love you only up to a certain point. I had been taught to hide my identity. And I had been taught that hiding that identity was worth whatever pain I endured in order to maintain the love and support of people around me, and most importantly in my life, to maintain the love of God. I had been taught that the violence of silence was worth enduring, even if it meant secretly wishing that God would just kill me already. I wish I could tell you that now that I've come out, it's all better now. I wish I could tell you that there is nothing but jubilee at the end of the rainbow, but the reality is, I'm not even sure there is an end to the rainbow. And I think this is because I am more than just a gay person. Despite how society continues to try and situate me in our larger community. I cannot tell you how many times I will have someone come up to me and say, hey, I want to learn everything there is to know about the LGBTQ+ community. Will you teach me because you're gay? Or how many times I have encountered people who are angry and scared because the theology they have learned is being pushed against, and they really want someone to blame for pushing what they call the gay agenda onto the church. And so they say, let's blame Caitlin because she had the audacity to be ordained as openly gay. But I, like all of you, am a dynamic, complex human being, and I am more than one identity marker. Because here's the deal, I am gay, but I am also a member of clergy. I'm a female cisgender person. I am a proud cat lady. I also have post-traumatic stress disorder due to childhood trauma. I consider myself to be a critical theorist and a practical theologian and a self-professed, undefeated Boggle champion. And I am all of these things all at once, all of the time. And it seems like a simple enough concept to just let people walk through the world being exactly who they are at all times. And yet, I cannot tell you how many times I am asked to keep a part of my identity hidden. The times in which I am asked to make sure I'm not being too flamboyant about my sexual orientation. And the times that I'm asked to make sure and not be so feminist in this space. And the times I am asked simply to just walk into a space as anything less than my whole self. And here's the thing. Most of the time when I hear this, it is from people who consider themselves to be extraordinarily inclusive. But what I'm realizing is that this term inclusive is actually often misunderstood with the term tolerance. And I love what scholar Suzanne Walters has to say about tolerance. Because she says that tolerance is really rooted in wrongness. It's rooted in this idea that we tolerate what we think we shouldn't have to. Like how we tolerate traffic during rush hour for the luxury of driving a car. Or how we tolerate long lines at the grocery store before a snow day so that we can make sure our homes are stocked. But here's the thing. I am not something to be tolerated. I am meant to be celebrated like each and every one of you for my whole, authentic self. There are times when we are navigating through these identities where it is possible that we have no idea what we are asking people to do, what we are asking them to navigate through. And as we consider this concept of navigation, I encourage us to consider the framework of intersectionality, a framework that was first coined by scholar and activist Kimberly Crenshaw in the 1980s. She coined this term to try and help people understand the intersection of what it means to be both female and a person of color. Because what she suggests is that females experience their own sense of discrimination and marginalization in this world. And so do people of color. And for women of color, that creates a layered intersection. Intersectionality is a tool that can help us understand our layers and the layers of those around us. Because if we can seek to understand people in authentic ways, it might allow us to transition away from that societally constructed box. You know the box I'm talking about. The box that says we have to be the right gender, or the right race, or the right sexual orientation, or the right gender identity, or the right socioeconomic status, or the right education level, and so on. That box that people try so desperately to fit us into, or that they try to fit into themselves. But let me tell you something, that box is traumatizing. It is traumatizing when you don't fit into that box. And that trauma leaves an impact, like the trauma for a young girl standing outside who thinks that best case scenario, God should just kill her already, rather than to come out and step outside of that societally constructed box. I don't believe that intersectionality can be fully embraced or understood unless we also embrace and understand that trauma. Because trauma leaves a lasting imprint. Trauma-informed care is a framework that was also coined in the 1980s to try and help specialists understand how to engage and interact with people who've experienced trauma throughout their lives. Like the trauma of being told what bathroom they can or cannot use. The trauma of being told what God they can or cannot pray to. Or the trauma of being told how you have to walk down the street and whether or not you can listen to your headphones. That kind of trauma. And as I have been able to understand both intersectionality and trauma-informed care, it has shaped how I engage in the classroom and in the larger community, because here's the thing. It blows my mind, the level at which we are expecting people to perform at. It blows my mind that we are expecting people to perform at peak level when we have asked them to walk into the room as a fraction of their whole selves. Why do we do this? I do believe that for the most part, people want to be genuinely inclusive. I believe that about our community. But we will never have full inclusion as long as we continue to operate using tolerance instead. We will never have full inclusion as long as we continue to ask ourselves and others to walk into a space with a hole missing. We will never know full inclusion as long as we continue to traumatize people before they ever make it into our room. Full inclusion happens when we get rid of tolerance, when we allow people to walk into a space as their whole selves, because that is the art of humanizing. Today I will leave you with a charge, and it is up to you whether you take up the task. Will you join me in honoring the intersections of someone's life and of your own? Will you join me in dismantling that traumatizing, societally constructed box that no one fits in? And will you join me in allowing yourselves and others to walk into a space as their whole, authentic selves? It is my genuine hope that we do. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Caitlin. How's everybody doing? We're doing good? Good? Okay, good. Woo! I like it. All right, so our next speaker is a fellow alum. Please welcome with a big hand of applause, Trenton Mattingly.
Hello. So in the Catholic tradition, official church documents are always released in Latin before any other language because it's the universal language of our church. And the titles of these documents always come from the first couple words of the first sentence of these documents. And so as a result, when the authors are creating these, the first sentences can usually be some pretty weighty, important sentences because they're trying to capture the main idea of an entire document in one sentence. And I think one document that does this especially well is called Ex Corde Ecclesiae, and that translates to mean from the heart of the church. It was written by Pope John Paul II, and it's a document that details the role of the Catholic University, and it also gave some guidelines for how they should be governed. And a lot of colleges today are still governed by that document, so it's really important in the grand scheme of things. But I want to focus on back on that title again, that from the heart of the church. Because if we think about what a heart does, it pumps blood throughout the body to keep it alive. And so when John Paul is saying that the Catholic University is springing from the heart of the church, it seems to me that he's saying that the Catholic University sustains the church and keeps it alive. And that's quite the compliment if you think about it. And I think this pairs really well with Bellarmine University's motto, in veritatis amore, in the love of truth. So if you kind of put those two phrases together, from the heart of the church and the love of truth, from the heart of the church and the love of the truth, I think you can start with those two phrases as kind of the building blocks of a case for why a Catholic university is relevant in today's times and will also be relevant in the future and valuable. So the first idea I kind of want to explore here is the age of the Catholic Church as an institution. So it is one of the oldest, if not the oldest, continually operating institution in the world. It's been around for almost 2 millennia at this time, and for roughly half of its existence, it has been sponsoring, developing, and supporting the development of the university. And as a Catholic university, I think that puts you in a very unique position because your sponsor has been part of so much of history. It's been actively involved in them, or at least watched from the sidelines, seeing significant developments happen, historical events play out. And more often than not, the church has been on both sides of some of these events, or both sides of a new idea that's shown up. And so I think that creates such a huge wealth of collective wisdom just waiting for professors and students and the surrounding community of a Catholic university to engage in. I think an example that illustrates the point I'm trying to make here is to think if you've ever had like a wise grandparent or a respected community leader. There might be a lot of reasons why you respect these people, but one in particular is probably just because they've been through so much. They've experienced so much. They've had some incredible failures that they've bounced back from and lived to tell about. And they've had some incredible successes that they can be proud of for the rest of their life. So you may not always agree with the perspective that they have, but you're always going to find it valuable. And it's certainly going to expand your worldview regardless. And so the next idea I want to look at is that the Catholic University, again, as a product of springing from an institution that makes moral claims, ideally should have all academic disciplines should be viewed through an ethical lens. And I think this is valuable for a couple different reasons. But first, because I think it's something that you can use to integrate different fields of knowledge. When you have this cohesive theme running through all disciplines, you're providing something that can be used to tie them together and show how they build upon one another and how they interact. And I think that's particularly valuable from a liberal arts perspective, where it values the integration of knowledge over just the compartmentalization of it. And then I also think it's important and valuable because I never think it's wrong to invite someone into a consideration of right and wrong. So imagine if you are a big CEO of a big company and you ask one of your smartest, most informed employees to come up with some strategies to make you some more money. If you follow their advice, you could come up You could make yourself a very wealthy person potentially, but if you don't stop and to consider the ethical consequences of some of your decisions, you could find yourself in hot water really quickly. For example, what if you're making more money at the expense of your employees, or you're damaging the surrounding community, or you're even damaging your company's reputation or brand in the process of making more money? These are all things that you want to avoid, and so I never think it's a bad thing to flood society with more individuals who are willing to consider, is this right or is this wrong? And then the last idea that I have today is really two ideas that I've worked into one. And it's taking the Catholic concept of mystery and the Catholic concept of absolute truth and uniting those to form an incredibly beneficial educational philosophy that I don't think can be found anywhere else. And so these terms might sound self-explanatory, but I want to go into them a little bit just to make sure we're on the same page. So when we talk about the Catholic concept of absolute truth, we're saying that you can come to know things with certainty and that they're universally true no matter where you go. And what's more is that it's positive to know these things because these truths are rooted in God. And so when you're discovering these truths, no matter how silly they may seem, you're coming to a knowledge of God, and that's a good thing. You're coming to a knowledge of the Creator. And then when you look at, combine this with the idea of mystery, I think things can get even better. Because there's this common misconception that when we talk about mystery, that it's kind of a shoulder shrug and an I don't know. But that's not really what we mean. We mean that it is possible to know something and to come to a certainty of it, but it's so complex and vast and nuanced that you're never going to fit it in your life, in the concept in its entirety into your brain during your lifetime. No matter how long you study it or how long you live, you're never going to grasp it entirely. So to me, when you put those ideas together, you start off with the premise that knowledge is obtainable and you can be certain about it. And then you move forward to it's good to learn and to obtain knowledge. And then you end up, lastly, with the idea that you can never run out of things to learn. There's never a stopping point in your education. You know, no matter how much you study, you'll never grasp it all. And I think that that is an educational philosophy that really can do a lot of good. And in fact, I would find it to be a good antidote to a lot of the political climate that we see today. No one can agree on what a fact is anymore, and people are often very content to have, you know, more than one person in a room and say, well, this is my truth and this is your truth, and be fine with that. But we know that if they're contradictory, they can't both be true. And so either one idea is true and one is false, or they're both false and the true is somewhere in the middle and they've both got to keep exploring to find it. And I think maybe this is an overly optimistic view, but I think that if that kind of idea were to pervade our society, that a lot of those ills that we see in that would start to disappear. Thank you.
Thank you, Trenton. So, if you note in your programs, the next speaker was supposed to be Stacey Shane. However, she's not able to join us tonight. So, for our final speaker, this one's actually pretty special to me. I would say we've saved the best for last, but all of these speakers were our best. So, in that spirit, I'm proud to say this is my professor, the myth, the legend, Dr. Michael Strasser.
So I remember the first letter that I realized had value. Wasn't A or B or C, although those are important, and we're going to talk about those. It was S. So if you think back to pre-K, first grade, kindergarten, S stood for satisfactory on your grade cards, right? I loved to be satisfactory. I craved it. Loved it. Hated to be unsatisfactory. I was unsatisfactory always in math, handwriting, still am, right? But I loved to be satisfactory because I knew with every satisfactory grade that Mamaw would give me $1 value, right? Here's the reality, though. Our life is made up of letters that constitute some semblance of value to us. So you learned letters to read, write, and speak. And unfortunately, we have values of letters that are ascribed to us as individuals, in our workplaces especially. I'm talking most specifically about generational letters, so X, Y, and Z. Now, take me, for instance. I'm a millennial, a member of Generation Y, and this is not a woe is me speech, although that would be very millennial of me, right? But I have been stereotyped, I've been typecast, my friends have been as well, but if you think about it, you have been too. Boomers, you are professionally competitive. You are career loyalists. You're a wealthy consumer base. Unfortunately, you had no balance. You would work 80, sometimes 90-hour weeks, and your X and Y kids looked at you and said, we don't want that, right? Generation X, you're autonomous, you're independent, but you're cynical. And sadly, sometimes too quiet and often forgotten. Generation Y, millennials, we are entitled, perfectionist, apathetic, right? All traits that tend to bug our boomer and X bosses. And then Generation Z, you're entrepreneurial, tech savvy. And we recognize, though, that this tech savviness may lend itself to a little bit of instability. But all of these are stereotypes, right? So how do we rise above? I always tell my students, you are worth more than a grade. You have an inherent value, a dignity. How dare me take that and ascribe that in a box, right? And define you according to that particular letter. But unfortunately, we do it all the time. So I want to argue today, or at least position today, what I'm calling generational agnosticism in our workplaces. Basically, that we look at people as individuals who are competent and capable on their own without ascribing these generational identifiers to them even before they step foot into their workplaces that may or may not fit. So I want to just kind of take you back as we look at job data over time, and I'm talking decades worth of job data. Workers have always pretty much wanted the same thing. We wanted balance, right? We wanted to know that we don't have to work 7 days a week for 15 hours a day. We want fair compensation, although fair is kind of defined differently depending on who you talk to. For the most part, workers will say, at least they have over the last several decades, that they want to be challenged, that they don't want to be bored when they go into their workplaces, and then ultimately they want to be recognized. They want to know that at the end of the day, they're getting a pat or a back, a promotion, or some form of recognition for a job well done. It's not rocket science, right? So several years ago, Peter Drucker supposedly said that culture eats strategy for breakfast. So I want to share with you just a couple ways that you, hopefully, can become a generation agnostic employee and how your workplaces can become generation agnostic work environments. So first, let's talk about what it means to be a generation agnostic employee. And you've heard some of these before, but I think it's good to remind ourselves as we live in the midst of all of these identifiers and generational differences that there really is nothing new under the sun, right? So first, work hard. This will never go out of vogue. It will always separate and distinguish. And we forget that often, that at the end of the day, work ethic counts. And it counts towards our merit and our worth in our organizations. Number two, work smart. So what I mean by this is that we should strive not to be problem finders or problem complainers, but instead to be problem solvers. And at the end of the day, nobody is indispensable, but some people are harder to replace than others, right? And number three, we want to make sure that we're working relationally. And this is something that transcends generational differences. It doesn't matter what age you are. You can be kind. You can be compassionate. You can treat others the way you would want to be treated. Working relationally allows us to look at people not just as a generation, right, and ascribe those stereotypes to them, but it allows us to look at them as individuals with an inherent value, a dignity. So those are three things you can do to be a generation agnostic employee. So what about being a generation agnostic workplace? Because this is actually a little bit harder. So I hearken back to Peter Drucker, culture eats strategy for breakfast. It really does. So number one, can you establish a culture where your people are able to buy into the mission and vision, where they're able to latch onto that, to hear what you say and be a part of something bigger than themselves? It's a big deal, right? Number two, we want to make sure that we're establishing fair conditions that are equitable, that are balanced, that allow for mobility. We don't necessarily need to cater to a particular age group or generation. We just need to make sure that whatever we have created has some semblance of equitable structure. And number three, we want to make sure that we have established some semblance of clarity. Again, being able to look at people and say, this is what I expect of you. That doesn't necessarily have to be a millennial trait. We always say we have these grand expectations of clarity. I would argue everyone wants to know what they're supposed to do, right? And clarity, again, transcends generational differences. It allows employees to meet and then exceed expectations. So in sum, as we think about what it means to be generation agnostic, it means we don't necessarily latch on to generational identifiers. We don't necessarily sit there and allow them to define us, and we don't cater as an organization to a particular age group. But instead, as employees, we work hard, we work smart, we work relationally. As workplaces, we establish a culture that people can buy into, that they believe in, right? We establish conditions that are fair, and we establish some semblance of clarity of expectation. You know, at the end of the day, we need to rise above generational stereotypes and engage beyond age. Your life is made up of letters, but your identity does not have to be defined by them. Thank you.
And that concludes the evening. The TEDx core team would like to thank the comm department, the art department, the theater department, the students, faculty, and staff who volunteered. So many people.
My goodness. And a very special thank you to Steve Baker and Laura Hartford, who helped us make the creation of this iconic TEDx sign. Look at it and say, ooh, ah, yes.
Quincy also helped build that, but he's being modest. As you exit the theater through the back, there will be a complimentary reception in the McGrath Art Gallery. In the spirit of Bellarmine, remember to always explore the world and start within. Thank you.